In today's video, I'm tackling the ugliest room in my son and daughter in law's new home, the guest bedroom, which we've nicknamed the hot sauce room because it's the best way to describe the color on the walls. A pink color that literally burns your eyes, just like hot sauce burns your mouth. Although the carpet is a neutral beige, it's really old and stained and has to go, as does the ceiling fan with 3 blades. Behind the door is a built in bookcase, which is probably the room's best feature. To begin the transformation, Nick pulled up the carpet. It was so brittle that it easily ripped into strips. He had it removed in less than 20 minutes, but the padding, tack strips, and staples took a few hours to remove. The padding was stuck to the floor in several spots, leaving dark stains behind. The kids scraped and scrubbed the floor, attempting to remove all traces of the stuck-on padding. Although still slightly stained, at least the floors were clean, so we moved on to the walls. Marcus, a family friend, primed and painted the walls in a light beige color. Alpaca by Sherwin-Williams. And here's how the room looked after 1 coat of primer and 2 coats of a 1 coat coverage wall paint. While Marcus was painting, I got to work on some small fixes. First, I painted the closet door, and then I decided to paint the door trim too because it was very scratched up. I made sure to first clean the trim really well with a TSP substitute to remove dirt and dull the surface. Although I prefer using an enamel paint on wood, this time I used the wall paint. There was some of the red paint on one of the outlets, so I used a utility knife and very carefully scraped it off, staying clear of the electrical slots. Then I replaced the plastic outlet cover with a gold one from Lowe's. The room had 2 vent openings, and one of them was missing a cover, so I bought 2 new matching vent covers to use. Just like in the kids' primary bedroom, the new covers were just a bit too wide, so I needed to use my oscillating tool to remove a sliver of the baseboard to get them to fit. At this point in the makeover, Nick and Amaya moved the rest of their furniture over from their rental home. The rug is from their primary bedroom, and the bed frame, you might remember, is from the basement bedroom makeover I did a couple years ago. I planned to center the queen-size bed along the longest wall, but it created a tight walking space at the foot of the bed. So I wanted to use a full-size bed instead. But Amaya wanted to use the queen-size bed and push it against the wall. I'm curious, what would you have done in this situation? The black desk is an old thrift store find that came from their rental home living room. The storage bench is from their rental home bedroom, and the solid wood bookcase was a $25 Facebook Marketplace find. Because we pulled up the carpet, I needed to conceal the damage caused by the tack strips by installing some quarter round. The small bookcase was built right over the top of the carpet, so I decided to frame the bottom of the bookcase with quarter round too to conceal the carpeting you could still see. I frequently mess up when cutting the 45-degree angles for the corners. So I started marking the trim, where to start the cut, and drawing the angle of the cut. And since I started doing this, I rarely make mistakes anymore. Once the trim is nailed in place, I use caulk to fill the gap along the top and to fill in the nail holes. Since I caulk as I go along, it's usually dry by the time I finish, so I can paint right away. Some people paint their trim before installing it, but I prefer to tape off the floor and just paint it in place. Even though the kids had scrubbed the floor, there was still a lot of staining, especially in places where the padding had been stuck to the wood. To avoid sanding, I decided to try using Golden Oak Restore a Finish. I scrubbed the product into the wood using extra fine steel wool. Once I had cleaned a large area, I wiped away the excess with a dry cloth. I wasn't sure if this would work or not, but I do think the floors look so much better now that they're done. Next, I moved to working on the window coverings. One window had a nice wood looking blind, but the other window had a cheap mini blind. So I removed the mini blind and its hardware. I also removed three additional sets of old hardware that were still attached to the window frame and filled all the nail and screw holes with caulk. I had previously removed two nice blinds from the primary bedroom windows because one of them was broken, but I still had one working blind that I could use in this window. I still wanted to add curtains for softness. I found two silver curtain rods in my basement that I could use, but I wanted to paint them black. First, I gave them a light coat of Zinsser primer to help the paint adhere better. Then I sprayed the rods and the brackets with a few light coats of black spray paint. Since the blinds can be used for privacy and light control, I just hung some inexpensive, lightweight cotton shears. Due to the short curtain rods, I wasn't able to hang the curtains much beyond the window frame, which I usually like to do, but they still add a little color and softness and conceal all the screw holes in the window trim. Since there was a built-in bookcase on one side of the door, I decided to add a bookcase on the other side to create a symmetrical effect. I found a very nice bookcase on Facebook Marketplace for just $25. I wanted to paint it with the wall paint, just like I had done on the built-in. So I gave the shelves and the book cabinet a good cleaning with TSP substitute and extra fine steel wool, and then wiped it clean with a damp rag. Next, I applied a shellac primer. I found that shellac primers create a great base for all types of paint. They block stains and keep the top coat from easily scratching, which is especially important since I'm using low sheen wall paint and not an enamel paint on this bookshelf. I didn't paint the back wall of the bookcase because I'm going to cover it with peel and stick wallpaper. I ordered a delicate botanical brown design on a white background from Amazon. To install the paper, I first sprayed the wood backing with Roman Easy Hang spray, which gives you time to adjust the paper before it sticks firmly in place. Wallpapering the back of a bookcase is a great project to try if you've never used peel and stick wallpaper before. It's easy to line up the first piece with the side of the bookcase, and then you just need to trim off the excess paper along the top and bottom edges with a utility knife. The second piece is only slightly more challenging. You'll need to line up the pattern and cut off the extra paper along the outside edge, which is fairly easy, especially if you trim away most of the excess paper before installing it. I decided to make use of that long excess strip of wallpaper I had just trimmed off to decorate this mirror. This is the mirror I removed from the upstairs bathroom in last week's video. Rather than applying the wallpaper to the mirror and then cutting off the excess paper, I decided to pre-cut the strips to fit the mirror's frame. I just pressed the paper in the frame to create a crease that I could cut along. To disguise the seam where the two strips slightly overlapped in the corners, I cut out individual flower and leaf designs and applied them directly over the seams. I hung the mirror on the wall across from the bed, a convenient spot for guests. Next, I wallpapered the back wall of the built in bookcase. The center shelf was not removable, so I applied the paper in two separate pieces, one above and one below that shelf. I originally ordered the wallpaper to cover the long wall to create an accent wall behind the bed, but we didn't end up putting the bed in that configuration. So, even though I don't like a bed against a wall, I wanted to make this arrangement feel intentional. So, I decided to use molding to create two frames above the headboard. I used painter's tape to plan out the size and location of the frames. Then I applied the peel and stick wallpaper to fill that space. I double checked my measurements and cut the molding to fit around the edges of the wallpaper. I also made sure the molding was level before nailing it in place. I filled in the corner seams and nail holes with some caulk, and I taped off the wallpaper and painted the molding with the wall paint. Since I still had a little wallpaper and molding left, I added another same sized frame on the wall above the desk. Well, the floors and walls were looking better, but I still had done nothing with that three-bladed ceiling fan. I flipped off the circuit breaker and just began removing screws until I finally had all the parts removed. Ceiling fans are often attached on heavy duty brackets, so I needed to install a traditional ceiling light bracket. And I just so happened to have one on hand because I had removed some when changing out lights in other rooms. For a free option, I decided to use a glass chandelier that I had previously thrifted and used in my foyer, but more recently, it had just been collecting dust in my basement. The chandelier canopy didn't completely conceal the hole in the ceiling, but since it was just a small area, I filled it with spackle and used my finger to mimic the texture of the ceiling. Once the spackle was dry, I touched up the ceiling paint around the chandelier canopy. To add a light by the bed, I ordered a wall sconce from Amazon. I chose a plug-in sconce because the battery-operated sconces just don't provide enough light to read by. The cord on this sconce is gold and somewhat decorative, so I don't mind how it looks hanging down. For additional light, I added a previously upcycled lamp to the top of the desk. Well, I've addressed the floor, the walls, the windows, and the ceiling, and now the room is finally ready for the finishing touches. I rounded up all the unused accessories Amaya brought over from her previous home, and I thrifted a few new things to help fill up the two bookcases. And in case you're wondering, yes, Amaya prefers the books turned backward. I don't do this in my own home. However, I do have mostly attractive vintage hardback books. I actually retrieved this black kerosene lantern from the next door neighbor's curb, and I think it looks cute on the top shelf. I thrifted a gold wall hook for $1.99 that can be used to hold a guest's wet towel. But for now, I'm going to decorate it with a tiny dried boxwood wreath, another $1.99 thrift store find. For some inexpensive wall art, I thrifted two large parrot pictures for $3.99 each. But don't worry, I have no intention of using the parrot prints. I just wanted the frames and the nice gold-trimmed mats. Unfortunately, the prints had been glued to foam board, but I was able to remove them without damaging the mats. Then I printed out two moody landscape images that I found in the public domain and taped them to the back of the mats and put them back in the ornate gold frames. Such an easy and budget-friendly upgrade, and I think these look very expensive now. I'm really trying to keep the costs down on this room makeover. So rather than buying new bedding, I'm using the sheets and a duvet cover that Amaya was using in her previous home. I just ordered two pillowcases and two pillow shams to add a little cottage charm to the existing bedding. The storage bench is also an older piece of Amaya's. I wasn't sure about using it at first since it's gray, but with a beige throw blanket, I think it looks fine and it gives guests a place to put a suitcase. I was hoping to find a small table to use next to the bed, and I couldn't believe my luck at finding this solid wood one for just $7.99 at Goodwill. Since it doesn't need to hold a lamp, I just placed a couple of small decorative items on top. The last area to style was the desk. I started by replacing the plain black knobs with some gold rings that I bought half off at Hobby Lobby. Isn't it amazing how much $2 knobs can dress up a piece of furniture? For the top of the desk, I added a variety of thrift store finds: two candlesticks and two candles, a small picture, and a wood bowl of Amaya's. I also placed a small thrift store pillow on the desk chair. This was the ugliest, spiciest room in the house, but here's how it looks today. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this before and after, I hope you'll hit subscribe and check out my playlist of room makeovers for even more ideas.